There we go. Good. Got the sound going, up and running. Welcome to the program, everybody. My name is Emilio Ramos. It's great to have you back for another episode of Reformed Apologetics here at Red Grace Media. And today on the program, we are going to have a great time because we are joined by a very special guest. James White is going to be joining us today to talk about textual criticism, among some other things probably, but I thought it'd be a great opportunity for us to talk about some cutting edge stuff going on with textual criticism, stuff that I've been wondering about, stuff that a lot of people who are into textual criticism have been talking about with CBGM and everything dealing with that whole field of study. So I hope that you guys enjoy the program today. It's good to see everybody in the chat. God bless all of you. Welcome to this episode. And let me just kind of let you guys just remind us really what's coming up here in the next couple of weeks. Next week, matter of fact, we rescheduled Canon Busey, but he's back for next week, and I'm excited about that. We're going to be talking to Canon Busey about Van Til's apologetic, and we're going to be walking through a very, very important section of Van Til, a work that he did entitled My Credo, and kind of the summary statement that he gave regarding presuppositional apologetics. That is really cool. Also, first week of June, we're going to be joined by Mike Riccardi of the Master's Seminary and Grace Community Church. And so I'm excited to have that brother on the program as well. Also, for those of you who are interested, I did a program on revealed apologetics with Eli Ayala, talking about Reformed theology and presuppositional apologetics. And so if you're interested in that, just mosey on over there eventually to Revealed Apologetics. Make sure and listen to that episode. I thought it went really well. Eli's a great guy and doing really great work. And so I'm excited to partner up with him, and probably going to be having him on Red Grace Media as well. So that should be really interesting. Presuppositionalists need to stick together. We are a small remnant these days, and so it's good to have another brother in the trenches with us like Eli. But also at the end of this program, after we chat with Dr. White for a while, I don't know how long we'll keep him, how long we'll torture him, but afterwards, I do want to talk about Ravi Zacharias, because obviously we just lost a huge person in Christian apologetics. Ravi Zacharias, who especially early on in my studies of apologetics, had a very profound impact in my life. And so want to give a short tribute to Ravi Zacharias and play a little clip that I thought was just really, really, really amazing, really interesting. But as promised, we are joined today by Dr. White from Alpha and Omega. Really needs no introduction. Dr. White, welcome to the program. It's good to see you. Hope we can not only see you, we can, but hear you too. So how you doing?
Oh, pretty good. Last time we saw each other was in Israel, actually.
Yeah, that's right. We were atop of Masada last time we saw each other.
Well,
huffing and puffing, brother.
Well, you were. I got up there a whole lot faster than you did, as I recall. But I was sort of sitting around, just sort of waiting.
Yeah. No, that's not the version I remember. I remember you were ready to go into cardiac arrest. But other than that small detail that you forgot. You told me your heart rate.
That's right. But let's give the rest of the story. I climbed all of Masada faster than you. Yeah. With my heart doing over 200 beats per minute in an irregular heartbeat. So what could I have done if that hadn't happened?
Right,
I mean,
that's right.
What can I say?
I can't even. I have no alibi, brother. You are older. You're in worse shape than I am, and you still beat me.
Really? Oh man, I can't wait to get you on a bike.
Yeah, well, that trip will live in infamy for me. That was a great trip.
It was.
We met Donnie on that trip. How can you forget Donnie, right?
Donnie was something else, and then every Bible study became a witnessing opportunity for Donnie. Yeah. Even on the banks of the Jordan River, we were doing messianic prophecies from the Hebrew text and stuff like that. So.
Yeah,
that was great.
I need to kind of revel in this a little bit. People don't understand. We're at Qumran caves, and we're doing a study on the Dead Sea Scrolls, and James White is teaching us about the Dead Sea Scrolls in front of the location where I mean, how many people can say that? I mean, talk about a bucket list item. I mean, that's pretty surreal.
It was, and there's still an 80% chance that we'll be back there in late September, early October. But man, what a mess right now.
Yeah, no, tell me about it. What's your state like? I mean, Texas is trying to get back to normal a little bit. I think we're kind of ahead of a lot
Well,
of people, but what's
yeah.
Arizona like?
We never felt super locked down. We never at Apologia Church we didn't stop meeting. We've soldiered on because we did not interpret the governor's recommendations as prohibiting that. A lot of people did. There were only a few churches in Phoenix that kept meeting, and certainly the media tried to shame us into doing that, but we didn't. So it's been, there's a lot of people that are really scared. To be honest with you, it's let's not get into that, or we'll never get onto the actual subject. But we've done all right, and there's a lot of people hurting. A lot of our folks have lost their work, lost their employment, lost their businesses. It's going to be interesting to see what the Lord has in store in the future.
Yeah, for sure, man. Well, today I brought you on the program, brother, just because I thought, who better to talk to about stuff that I've been curious about, and what actually led me to reach out to you and talk to you. I've been reading a book on textual criticism, which I have not read a book on textual criticism in a while. It's been a long time. And the book that I started reading, I'm sure you're
the Hixson one.
Yeah, the Hixson one, the myths and mistakes that people are making, and they make some pretty big claims in that book about having to rethink numbers and dates and how we date and how many manuscripts we really have. And Dan Wallace is saying they're even correcting me on my scholarship, and he seems to suggest they're right, that we need to kind of take a fresh look at the kind of data that we're giving out and how accurate that really is. So I don't know if you've spent any time looking at that.
Well, Peter teaches at Phoenix Seminary just across the valley here, and so he did his PhD on CBGM. So he's been a real good resource to have here locally, and certainly, the book presents a number of different perspectives. You don't have to. It's not just one perspective that's being presented, and what is good about it is reading it and going, well, that's good. It helps to maintain balance, but the reality is that the majority of people who are in apologetics should know this stuff, but generally do not, for the simple reason that the majority of folks in apologetics don't know the biblical languages. And I've never understood that. You've heard me talk about that before.
Yep.
It's always been something I've never understood, because the two classes that I found the most helpful in doing apologetics, Greek and church history. And sometimes they end up crossing paths too, as far as that's concerned. And so if you can't read the Greek New Testament, it's really, you're stuck with taking someone's word for it who can read it, who can tell you what the manuscripts are saying and things like that. And so I've just always felt that that's just a major weakness, and something I've tried to encourage people to get around. But it's neat to see. I mean, Hixson and Gurry are Peter is younger than my son. So this is the next generation, and it's great to see them coming up and getting in the battle.
Yeah. No, amen. Well, let's just dive right in, brother, and talk about some of the issues that are involved. And I would say first, I would just ask you, because my program is really dedicated to presuppositional apologetics. That's what we like to talk about. You've seen my open air preaching stuff, and I do a lot of that stuff. And so when we think of presuppositionalists, you're definitely one of the main guys that comes up. But people always seem to mention the fact that though you are a presuppositionalist, you do not neglect to involve yourself in debates that deal with what people would, I think, misunderstand to be evidential type of content, because you're dealing with manuscripts or the reliability of the Bible or things like that. And so obviously I think the two are not, I don't think you're an evidentialist, for one. Number two, I think that what you do as a presuppositionalist is very, very important to show how precept can be applied to these different fields. But talk a little bit about that, James, because I think people that dive into presuppositional studies, they go into it with this misconception.
Well, they do have a misconception because if you read Van Til, if you can make it through Van Til, and then read Bahnsen or any of the others, they always say the same thing. All evidence is God's evidence. There is the difference when you understand what evidentialism means. Evidentialism means that you are presenting evidence to the individual as if they are a judge, rather than presenting the evidence to them that there is a judge who will judge them. That really is a fundamental approach difference between the two sides. A presuppositionalist recognizes the presuppositional nature of commitments to worldviews, the fact that man is suppressing the truth of God. And so I'm not going to present quote unquote evidences to an enemy of God and say, you get to judge whether God exists or not, because I already know they've already made that decision and I'm trying to deal with that. I'm trying to show them the inconsistencies and incoherence of their position. And so that's the first thing to point out. And then secondly, the nature of dealing with the history of the Bible. We don't live in a day where we can just simply assume that. Most of the people in our culture have already been exposed to skepticism as to the reliability of the text of Scripture in the first place. And so this isn't an issue of presenting a transcendental argument, and that somehow is going to explain whether the pericope adulterae in John 7:53 through 8:11 is original or not. There's no way to do that. The people who try to do that in a quote-unquote transcendental or presuppositional matter end up demonstrating the inappropriate circularity of their position rather than the appropriate circularity of ultimate commitments to epistemology and things like that. It's a very different thing. That could get us into some of the TR-only stuff and the people making claims along those lines. But the fact is, our generations before us, they dealt with a culture where there was a general acceptance of the reliability of the text of Scripture. Now we have exactly the opposite. And so we have to deal with that. We have to recognize that, and we have to have responses to that. And we live in a day when I've got more information, textual information sitting on this iPhone than I could have carried in a wheelbarrow 30 years ago, completely, and much easier to access too. So the very time when the greatest skepticism is around us on a campus or something like that, we have the information available to us if we will just master it. And I personally just, before we hooked up, I was looking at a particular variant. I might show you some stuff about it. And it's just, I find it fascinating. I find it to be a blast. So, yeah. There's that aspect to it as well. But I think we need to be able to give that type of an answer. And just simply saying, well, you just need to accept what the Bible says doesn't answer why there are differences between Bibles. Why one Bible has double brackets around the longer ending of Mark, or why King James has 1 John 5:7 in it, or the variant that I was just talking about. How do you understand Romans 5:1? Is it an indicative or a subjunctive? What's the difference between the two? I mean, that impacts your preaching and your teaching of that text as well. So I think it's all really important stuff that unfortunately is getting more and more esoteric to most seminary graduates. What I mean by that is we're pushing so many other topics on them that not only are the biblical languages becoming minimized, but the less and less time you have, for example, to learn Greek, that means much less time even looking at textual critical issues or learning how to utilize the resources that we have. So more and more seminary graduates are coming out, and they don't even want you to ask questions about stuff like that.
Very good. Very, very good. Well, James, let's talk about textual criticism directly. And first of all, let's talk a little bit about CBGM, what it is. Most people do not even comprehend it. Is there even an easy way to understand it? I watched an episode that you did on it where you try to do some of that in terms of making it simple. But in a nutshell, what is it and why is it important? Why do we have to reckon with it? Because in one of your videos, you said explicitly, like it or hate it, you have to deal with what's going on with this coherence-based method. So what is it?
Yeah, we have to, because it's already impacting the readings in your Greek New Testament. Every time a new edition of the Nestle-Aland text comes out, for example, if you use the NASB, which in and of itself is going to be multiple NASBs pretty soon, as you know. You're going to have the 2020 edition. You're going to have the 1995 that's still going to be being printed by Steadfast Bibles and by others. The 1977 is still in print. I happen to really like that one. Mm-hmm. And now, of course, Masters is going to be doing their own, which is going to have changes, but it's still going to be the base text, the NASB. Well, what are they all based upon? Well, basically the Biblia Hebraica Stuttgartensia Hebrew text in the Old Testament, and then the Nestle-Aland text in the New, but those have all changed over time. So Nestle-Aland 26th, 27th, we're currently at 28th. I'm not sure when they're going to do 29th. And what is driving the changes in those standardized texts is CBGM. Whether you like it or not, whether you understand it or not, there have already been relatively minor changes so far in the ESV, not in the NASB so far. I don't know what the Masters guys did as far as this is concerned. I don't know if they followed NA27. I don't know if they're following what's called the ECM, the Editio Critico Major, which is coming out of Munster, which is what determines what the Nestle-Aland is going to read. I'm not sure what they've done with that. But if you have the ESV, you already have one major relevant textual change due to CBGM, and that's at Jude 5, whether it says Lord or Jesus, which is extremely important. Mm-hmm. So what is it? Well, some people have tried to describe it as we're handing the Bible over to the computers, and we're just asking the computer to tell us what's in the text. That's not the case. We knew that computers would help us. We knew that computers, for example, could keep far more data in mind and see patterns that our little teeny minds can't do. Mm-hmm. But most people didn't see what has coming in the form that it has. Computer coherence-based genealogical methodology. Somebody called it, a student of mine when I was teaching at a seminary last year called it computer-based German madness. But because it is basically done by Germans, was designed by Germans. But basically what it's doing, we have what's called a manuscript tradition that has been thoroughly corrupted in transmission. Let me explain what that means. We don't have a straight line of manuscripts going back to the beginning that we can then just trace a genealogical line. If we had something like that, it wouldn't be all that difficult to recognize variations and changes and alterations and things like that. But the fact is, we have a snippet here and a snippet there of an entire flow of manuscripts from all over what we would call Europe, the Middle East, North Africa, primarily. And so what has happened is, especially during the early period, the Romans were persecuting the church. And we know from historical documents that one of the things they wanted to do was to destroy the Christian scriptures. And they succeeded in doing that in many instances. And so most of the manuscripts that we have from the first few centuries are fragmentary. And then once we start getting full manuscripts in the 4th century, like Sinaiticus, Vaticanus, Alexandrinus, things like that, we don't know exactly how they're related to one another. We don't know their genealogy because the connecting pieces are missing. They've been lost, they've been destroyed. Sometimes we show people pictures of papyri and things like that, and they're like, man, that stuff's really beat up. And then I just look at them and go, what are you going to look like in 1900 years? Give them a break. I mean, my seminary class books are already yellowed in their pages. So, and I'm not quite that old. So this is what we're facing. And so what coherence-based genealogical methodology does is it's seeking not to create an absolute genealogical tree, but what it's doing is it looks not at manuscripts, This is one of the things where it's very different from what most of us were taught when we were in seminary or graduate college or whatever. It's not looking at the manuscripts as much as it's looking at the text that a manuscript contains, because that text can be compared to other texts, and you can determine if two texts are 99.5% identical, then that obviously means they're closer to one another in copying than two that are 88.9% identical to one another. And so there is something called pre-genealogical coherence, and the Germans stink at coming up with names. If you know anything about German, they make up entire words just by cramming other words together until they're 3 paragraphs long. So they've never been real big on coming up with really descriptive terminology that is easy to remember. But you have what's called pre-genealogical coherence, where you can just compare two manuscripts and how often do they agree with one another. And the computers can tell us this. And there are now online tools where you can go online, you can take any two manuscripts of a book, let's say Paul's Epistle to the Romans, and you can compare those two manuscripts, and the computer will tell you this is how often they agree when other manuscripts disagree. That's the important thing, is when do they read the same? Because the vast majority of manuscripts all read the same. In fact, what CBGM has done, other than anything else, is you can now, with computer documented accuracy, demonstrate that the New Testament manuscripts, they're all telling the same story. They all have the same text. They agree in the vast majority of things. And what we can now do is look at where they disagree, where there are variants between manuscripts. And when you get two manuscripts that are 98% the same, they are obviously closely related. And what the computer can start doing, now that we've digitized and entered in the readings of all these manuscripts, which has taken years and years and years and years to do, is now we have a huge computer database that now can start seeing relationships between manuscripts that we were not able to see. Back in the old days, like when I read Bart Ehrman's doctoral dissertation, which was done somewhere in the late 80s or something like that, you would connect manuscripts together if they agreed 70% of the time. The computer can go way beyond that and see many, many more variants and how they relate. So what we're doing is what coherence-based genealogical methodology is it's seeing how well two texts, not manuscripts, how coherent they are in their readings and creating relationships between them on the basis of that huge database of readings. And so what this allows us to do is to go, well, let me give you an example. The best way to illustrate this is to give an example that we already have in our Bibles, and that's in Jude 5. In Jude 5, pretty much every translation up until very, very recently had the same reading, and it talked about the Lord delivered them out of Egypt. Kurios is the Greek term. Now, we've known for a very, very long time that there were other manuscripts that said Jesus delivered a people out of Egypt. Now, you think about that. If it says Jesus delivered a people out of Egypt, we know who did that in the Old Testament. What does that mean? That would identify Jesus as Yahweh. And there are other things there in Jude that are doing the same thing. So it fits contextually. But most scholars, looking at the manuscripts, said, well, it's more probable that the original reading was Lord. Well, CBGM has now been applied to what are called the general epistles and to the book of Acts. We're waiting for Mark. I'm waiting for Mark. I'm doing a PhD in this area, and Mark will increase my data set by 55%. So I'm sitting around twiddling my thumbs, and this pandemic hasn't helped getting Mark published yet either, that's for sure. But we've done Jude. And so all that and in fact, for Jude, all the manuscripts that we possess are in the database. For some books that won't be the case, but for Jude it is. And when you look at the manuscripts that say Lord on one side, then you look at the manuscripts that say Jesus on the other side, something becomes quite apparent. when you look at the manuscripts that say Lord, the closest relative that the computer can see as a possible ancestor, so in other words, the ones that have the greatest coherence, the closest relative will frequently say Jesus. When you look at the manuscripts that say Jesus, they have coherence. They have a higher coherence. In other words, their closest relative also says Jesus. So what this tells us is the same thing that textual criticism would suggest, and that is when a scribe would look at Jude 5, a scribe would see Lord as being, that's what you'd expect. The Lord delivered the people out of Egypt. That's what you'd read in the Greek Septuagint. That's what you'd expect. So if you say Jesus delivered out people, that makes you stop and go, what's being said here? And so what the computer sees in light of coherence between the possible ancestors is there's high coherence in the Jesus list, lower coherence in the Lord list, which means that shows that scribes frequently would change Jesus to Lord because that was more easy for them to understand. Now, there's also something else to remember. Jesus and Lord would be something called a nomina sacra. The sacred names were either 2 or 3 letter abbreviations, depending on the manuscript, with a line over top. And so you would think that Jesus is a longer word. It would be harder to confuse that with something. Remember, it's a nomina sacra. And so there's a higher coherence amongst the Jesus readings. And so the 28th edition, the 27th edition of Not Nession had Lord. 28th edition, following ECM and CBGM, has Jesus as the primary reading. So the ESV followed that. And so now the ESV, the original ESV said Lord, now it says Jesus. So once Mark comes out, what's going to happen then? Because many of the translations still have active translation committees and go through revisions at points in time. And so John's being worked on right now. Mark is already finished. I was in Munster over a year ago, and they told me Mark was already done. It just hasn't been published yet. Once Mark and John come out, you're going to be hearing a lot more about this, especially if this sheds light on key textual variants like John 1:18. Is it the unique God, or is it the only begotten Son?
Yeah.
Textual variants like that, I'm really looking forward to seeing what CBGM says about things like that. So what it really is a tool that says there's higher coherence amongst these manuscripts than these manuscripts. Now, there's different ways of looking at that. It's called pre-genealogical and then genealogical coherence. There is a slight element of subjectivity in the programming, but it's not really major. I won't go into the details right now, but vast majority of scholars would agree on what those readings are. But the point is, it's just one tool. So I know, for example, one translation that has already looked at the data for Jude 5, and they're not adopting Jesus. They're going to do their new version and stay with Lord, even though they know what CBGM says. So it's like having another tool that sheds a little more light, but it doesn't make it the be-all and end-all of all things. It's just more data and insight to be able to make the decisions concerning these textual variants.
Now, James, when you were talking about this in a previous video, you talked about how, in light of what's going on with this, you're going to have to rewrite the KJV only controversy. And I was thinking, okay, so
why?
Not only why, but is that going to happen? Number one, number two, and then
I don't know.
Of course, why? Is that and also, is that bad or good? Is it I'm gonna have to rewrite it because it's a good thing? Okay.
Yeah. No, it's a good thing. And here's why. One of the revolutionary things that CBGM has done is it has challenged the language that we have used for a very, very long time in discussing textual critical issues. So if you pick up Metzger's commentary on the Greek New Testament, you will find it using terms, especially two terms, and that would be Byzantine and Alexandrian texts. Also sometimes Western, sometimes Caesarean, but those two terms especially. CBGM has challenged the existence of any text type outside of the Byzantine. It's basically said we have no evidence of an Alexandrian text type. We have no evidence of certainly no evidence of a Caesarean, no evidence of a Western text type at all. And so you can't, if you read, most of us have Metzger's text commentary in accordance or Logos or whatever it is we use. You can't hardly read any entry without encountering those terms, without encountering Alexandrian Byzantine. Well, if when Mark comes out especially, it remains consistent that there is no coherent Alexandrian text, well, then you need to change how you're describing things. You need to stop using language that was developed when we couldn't see genealogical relationships between manuscripts and start using language that is going to be more accurate to the kind of information we actually have. And so, yeah, I would want to update the work so that it would reflect that information. The problem is we're not going to. Well, I was told last year that they need to have the ECM done by 2030. Well, yay! So got another decade to wait on that. But anything being written right now is going to be dated by 2030. And that's a good thing. Now, for some people, that's a bad thing. For many people, the idea is we need to have the unchanging word of God. And therefore, that's when they go back to the Textus Receptus or whatever, as if that was the unchanging word of God, which didn't exist before Erasmus. So that's not the direction to go. What we're doing is we are bringing together. Let me just put it this way: Erasmus would have loved this. Erasmus would have just gone, "Oh, you people, I love you. You are wonderful." They would have died to have the kind of information that we have, and so that means we have to be willing to follow the evidence. If our ultimate commitment is we want to know what the apostles wrote. So just remember there have been less than 100 changes, I think, in the Nessiolan text in all the general epistles and Acts due to CBGM, and 95% of those changes you wouldn't recognize in an English translation. Okay, so we're talking fine tuning here. The Jesus issue at Jude 5, okay, that's a big one. That one stands out. But honestly, all the stuff in Acts, I guess the only thing that's interesting about it is it did move the Nessiolan text back a little bit more of a Byzantine flavor, but only slightly. Only slightly. So it for a Christian that doesn't have a bunch of conspiracy theories already running through their mind, and don't we all today? What this should be is, hey, this is awesome that this level of information is now becoming available to all of us. Any of us can go online now and utilize the CBGM modules for the general epistles and for Acts. They're not hiding anything. It's all right there. You can look at it. There's variables you can enter in. It's great. It's awesome. I think of my Muslim friends. They don't have anything even close to this for the Quran, and won't for in any time in the future as well. That is a good thing. It's not a bad thing. People who try to make that a bad thing, I think, are just completely misunderstanding the whole purpose of what we're doing. We want to be able to establish that what we're reading is what was written by the apostles. You don't do that by going back and grabbing a text from the 16th century and saying, this is our final authority. You do that by utilizing all the information that's available to us, and more information becomes available all the time.
So I know that you wanted to share a manuscript with us tonight, and so I want to get to that. But real quick, you mentioned the issue of people saying, well, we just got to go back to a text that doesn't move around. It's more solid. Right. It's just consistent. I've heard that. I mean, I've got seminary friends that are like, we're getting to the point where, everything's being updated, everything is changing now with CGBM and everything that's going on with that. I mean, it's going to get to the point where literally it's going to be like we don't know what the text is anymore, and we have nothing.
That's just not true.
We have nothing solid to fall back on, and so many people are going back to the KJV with these arguments and with these concepts. And so, how do you respond to those kinds of fears that people have?
Well, like I just said, even the changes the CBGM has brought in general epistles and Acts have been incredibly minor. Incredibly minor.
So we're talking about fine-tuning. We're
talking about fine-tuning. We're talking about, look, again, the issue is I want to know what the apostles wrote, not what someone 1,000 years after the apostles should have written. And that's always been the goal. And we're just simply continuing to follow that goal. And this other attitude is capitulation. It's giving up. It's not being willing to do the hard work that is involved. And it's also not recognizing that over the past century, we have gathered so much more ancient information on the New Testament that we did not have before. All the papyri have come since the 1930s primarily. And with the ongoing work of the CSNTM right there in Texas, cataloging manuscripts and finding new manuscripts and everything that they're doing. This is vitally important stuff. And it is absolutely necessary for us to be able to take on the Bart Ehrmans of the world and to defend the veracity of the text. I do not believe a TR advocate can take on Bart Ehrman. There's just no way to do it because you have already capitulated on the factual evidence. And so believe me, I've engaged a lot of those folks and the best they have to offer. And that kind of an attitude doesn't understand the nature of the changes that are being proposed and that are being brought in. Doesn't recognize that in fact what CBGM has done is up till CBGM, all we had was, well, this estimates that 97% of the manuscripts read so-and-so. Now we actually don't have to cite a scholar. We can let the computer screen go, here's the numbers. And here is how massively consistent the New Testament manuscript tradition actually is. So all this stuff about massive editing and insertion of theology and doctrine, all this stuff, CBGM has documented that is simply untrue. It's just not possible. You don't have to sit there and quote A.T. Robertson now, and his authority establishes this. No, you can go right online and say, look at that, look at the numbers. There's the computer telling you that the average agreement where the variance exists is over 87%. That means where the variants don't exist, the average agreement is absolutely massive. I mean, it's the same text being copied. And that's what it communicates to us.
That's really cool. That's good. I want to talk to you a little bit about Bart Ehrman here in a second, but why don't you, let's try to throw up what you have on the screen if you can pull that up and kind of fly by what this presentation is all about.
Well, let me see if I can show this to you. You tell me if this shows up.
Okay.
Okay, you got it?
Yeah.
Do you have a... Okay. So a couple weeks ago, I preached at church on the relationship of justification and the resurrection on Easter Sunday. So he was delivered over for our transgressions, raised up because of our justification, right? And that's when I really noticed that continues straight into Romans 5:1. Therefore, having been justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ. Now, you may be aware that there is a textual variant in Romans 5:1, and it is in the verb ekamen or ekomen. It is a one-letter variant between what's called the indicative or the subjunctive. So it's either saying we have peace with God, or if it's the subjunctive, it is let us be at peace with God. Let us recognize our justification and be at peace with God. I think either one of them fits, but the external evidence has always favored the subjunctive.
Mm-hmm.
And so here is manuscript 0220. It is only one leaf. It is only one page, but it happens to be from the middle of Romans. And
you think you can center it a little bit more, or making it a little bit smaller?
Okay, I can't see it.
Okay. I would just say
I
if you can make it a little smaller, then great. If not, that's okay. We can see it. There we go. Yeah, it's just bringing it a little bit more into view.
Okay. So you mean smaller like this?
Yeah. Yeah, because it was just we could just see kind of the right part of it, but not the whole.
Okay.
Not the whole manuscript. But there you go.
Can you see where my arrow is?
Yeah.
Okay.
There you go. Perfect. Now it's in frame.
Okay. So here is the beginning of the word echomen, and over here, I'm not sure. Can you see where over here?
I can. Yeah, I can. It's
okay. That's the next line. So the problem is the variant is in the hole. see the hole here? And so the question, you would have this letter, which is down in a letter below. That's actually the word Christ, which you see the chi right here.
Yep.
So that would be what's right here. And then the question is, what would go right here? Would it be an omicron like this, or would it be an omega like this?
Mm-hmm.
And if you look really carefully, it looks like there's ink here and here, which would be a little bit more consistent with like an omicron here, an omicron down here. And it's hard to see how an omega, like right here, would fit right there if those are remnants of the ink. And so if you look, if you have the Nestle-Aland 28th edition in your Bible program, Emilio, and you look at Romans 5:1 and look at the manuscripts that are listed, there will be 0220 will be found there. Are you looking for it there?
No, I'm not looking at my program right now, but I do have a Greek text in front of me.
Now, is that a critical text? The Nestle-Aland text?
Well, I have both. I've got both a Nestle-Aland and I got the UBS. UBS doesn't have much of an apparatus. Here, hold on. Let me grab.
But it would have this, and it would have a very full one for Romans 5:1. Trust me.
Okay.
Because just for everybody listening, the difference, the reason you have more listings in
that's right. Yeah,
it's got a full listing.
Yeah,
the UBS.
It's either the Omicron or the Omega.
Now, for the listing of the Omicron, look down the listing of manuscripts, and early on, after the papyri, you'll find 0220, and then next to it, the letters VID. Okay? Vid, which means it seems. And so you can see by what I'm projecting on my screen, what they're saying is, it seems it had an Omicron, but we're not 100% certain, so you really can't put as much weight on it because there happens to be a hole smack dab in the middle of the manuscript right at that particular point. Now, that raises questions like, how do you enter 0220 into the CBGM database? How do you enter it? How do you get the computer to deal with stuff like this? These are the types of issues that we get to deal with today. You and I get to do this sitting in the air-conditioned comfort of our homes. Erasmus would be going, "You lucky dogs." He really would be, because he would love to be able to examine these manuscripts. He would have loved to have had the ability to have collations of manuscripts, catalogs. None of that kind of stuff existed in his day at all. And so we have so much more available to us. And like I said, I just happen to have been looking at that particular thing right before we came on air. And
this is Daniel Wallace's Center for Manuscripts.
That's straight off of the CSNTM website.
Wow.
You can look at that if you go to csntm.org, go to library, go to manuscripts, put 0220 in. You can bring the same thing up that I was just looking at, And the only challenge, even if you're a seminary grad or a Bible college grad, is these manuscripts are written in majuscule text, not minuscule text. And that's not what we were taught when we were in. You can figure it out. It takes a while, but the information is all there. Yep.
Wow. Okay, so I just want to ask you some questions based on the debate that you had with Bart Ehrman, because I think some of the points that he was raising, I think people still think this way, and people, I think he was trying to resonate. Really interesting going back and watching that all over again. But anyway,
Yeah.
I wasn't there live for that debate. I was there for the Bart Ehrman Wallace debate. I was there for that, SMU. But during the debate, Bart Ehrman said, if God has preserved his word, where is it? And he's like raising his hands. He's like, where is it? He's yelling, where is it? If God's preserved his word. And so the way that you answered, and correct me if I'm wrong, but basically what you're saying is that God has preserved his word in the multiplicity of the manuscripts that we have, and textual, and the science of textual criticism is how we can get as close as possible to the original text. Would that be right?
Right. Yes, and I think that was Dan Wallace's response as well. And what needs to be understood is that Bart Ehrman holds a radically skeptical view that is far out of the mainstream, that I can assure you his doctoral dissertation advisor, from whose name he takes a lot of his authority, would have found extremely difficult to understand. That was Bruce Metzger. And that is, he basically says that if God were to inspire Scripture, then he would make sure that there would be no textual variants. And when I first heard him say that, it was on a Lutheran program, Issues, Etc., in St. Louis. When I first heard him say that, I was absolutely stunned, because I'd heard that from King James onlyists, but I never expected to hear that from someone like Bart Ehrman. And I wonder how that works. Does God just all of a sudden take over the person? Let's say the original reading at Romans 5:1 is the indicative, and a scribe is not paying attention or something and is about to write the omega. Does God just take the scribe over and start doing automatic writing to put the right letter there each time he's going to make a mistake? Does he make the scribe just burst into flames before he can make the error? I mean, how do you even do something like this? Bart Ehrman's understanding of what would be required for inspiration would require that the Bible could not have been written prior to 1949, because we invented photomechanical copying, the photocopier, in 1949.
I like how you got him to admit in the debate that with the same degree of skepticism that he approaches the manuscripts of the Bible, if he applies that consistently, let's say to the Gospel of Thomas or whatever, Tacitus or whatever, and it was amazing to me to hear him say like how agnostic he is about everything in history. Yeah. And we need to hold him to that, and hold everybody to that cites him.
Well, but they won't, and because he's not consistent with that either. When he writes about early church history, he will quote from Tacitus or Suetonius or whoever, and he'll never stop and say, "Now we're not really sure they actually wrote this because we have so few manuscripts." No, he's not going to do that, and none of them do that. It's only with the New Testament, which the thing that you have to hear in the Bart Ehrman debate from 2009 was when he started. What is it they say about Trump going off script or off prompter?
It's dangerous. It's dangerous. But it's where he thrives there.
Yeah, and he feels like he can do that. But remember, when I asked him, I was going to ask him a question. He had said on the Unbelievable radio broadcast that there was this huge gap of time between when Paul wrote and the first manuscripts that we have of what Paul said. And so it's an enormous gap. And so I asked him, so what would you say about Suetonius or Tacitus or Pliny? about the time period. And he said, oh, ginormous, huge. And that's when he stopped and said, and I don't know that he really recognized what he was saying, but that's when he stopped and said, for the New Testament, we have far earlier attestation than for any other work of antiquity. And I almost interrupted him to continue my question. I am so thankful that I did not, because there you have the most prolific critic of the Greek New Testament saying that we have far earlier attestation for the Greek New Testament than for any other work of antiquity.
Yeah.
He'd also have to admit we have far more documentation numerically. And I think if he were, I would say we also have the best manuscripts as far as copyist quality. You put that together and you're left wondering where all this skepticism is really finding its origin at. Yeah.
I thought it was a staggering statement that Bart Ehrman said during the debate, that the textual variant in Hebrews chapter 2, verse 8, where Jesus is offered up by the grace of God, that changes the meaning of the entire book of Hebrews. Right. I didn't quite understand his meaning there, or how he arrived at that conclusion. Can you explain how Bart Ehrman could possibly claim the entire book, the entire meaning of the book is changed based on that one variant?
Yeah, well, what he's looking at is the phrase, so that by the grace of God he might taste death for everyone. And there is a variant concerning the word grace. There are a few manuscripts. There's two manuscripts, 0243 and 1739, and a few early church fathers who, instead of having charis, have chorus. So it's a one-letter difference. Who, apart from God, tasted death for everyone. Now, what you have to understand is being a textual critic doesn't make you a good theologian.
Yeah.
And one thing is certain, Bart Ehrman is not a good theologian by any stretch of the imagination. Phil Johnson has said that he was in theology classes with Bart Ehrman, and Bart Ehrman did not seem overly interested in what was going on at Moody Bible Institute. Some of the things he has said, for example, in a debate there in Dallas with one of your Dallas seminary professors. I'm not sure if you attended that one. Did you attend the debate where Bart Ehrman took on, what's the guy's name? It just escaped me. The guy did a job too, but he's a Dallas prof.
Yeah, I think I know who you're talking about, but I didn't go to the debate.
Younger
but I know
guy.
Which one. Yeah, it's a younger guy, black hair.
Yeah, and it was on the deity of Christ.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know which one you're referring to.
And one of the things that Ehrman said during that debate was that no New Testament author ever identified Jesus as Yahweh. And I'm like, oh, would I love to debate that one? That ain't going to happen. We've actually been in contact with him. Minimum to walk through the door, $25,000. Now, I'm hoping you can set that up, Emilio. Given the church there is probably just rolling in the dough, so maybe we could work that out sometime. But so he's not a good theologian.
Leighton Flowers was doable. I don't know about Bart Ehrman.
Yeah. So what he's saying is that if you have apart from God rather than by the grace of God, this somehow changes the entire meaning of the book of Hebrews. I'm sorry, I don't have any particular reason to think that Bart Ehrman has a particularly solid contextual grasp of the message of the book of Hebrews, because the message is by no means altered by that one letter. And in fact, even if you took it as in separation, so that apart from God, he might taste death for everyone, would be the cry of dereliction on the cross or something like that. That's not going to change the meaning in any way, shape, or form. And the writer does not then expand upon the term grace to try to attach it to something afterwards. So he makes the assertion. It's the same thing he does with the Mark passage, where some manuscripts say that Jesus in anger did something. Jesus did a bunch of things in anger in Mark. So what? That doesn't change anything whatsoever. And so he has not been, I think, thoroughly challenged on those issues. The funny thing is, I addressed all of them in a full seminar the day we debated, and I invited him to come. He has no interest in what we have to say. He has no interest whatsoever.
But those kinds of statements that he makes, they play really well with the crowd. The world loves. You can get on the Tonight Show with statements like that. We don't know if Jesus got angry or if he was sad. We don't have a clue. That'll get you on CNN any day.
It will.
Unreal. So. Well, another thing that you pointed out here when you were talking about Ehrman, to me, I mean, you know him a little bit better, but during the debate, it seemed to me like his frustration kind of came out. I don't want to judge his motive because we don't know his motive necessarily, but it just seems to me, James, like he's frustrated with God because God did not condescend to preserve his word in a way that makes sense to him. It just seems like throughout the debate, he's just demanding God. He has to do it this way, that way. If he wanted us to have it, why didn't he do this? Why didn't he do that? Just almost sounds like this is, I don't know, like that's kind of at the root of it. He's angry at God for what God did or did not do with the text.
Well, I think it's important to note that he makes the claim that it was not the textual issues that caused him to lose his faith. He makes the claim it was the problem of evil. Now, I can't answer any of those issues. All I can do is tell you that he was certainly around people who would have given him a meaningful and in-depth orthodox understanding of how inspiration took place. Whether he listened or not, I don't know. Whether he ever read Warfield on the subject, for example, and the meaning of theopneustos or any of those types of things, I do not know. The information would have been available to him. That would have been something he could have done. Whether he did or didn't, I don't know. All I can tell you is that he did make a statement. He later withdrew this statement in the sense of saying it was too much, but the very fact that he made it in a debate said volumes to me. It was also I think it may have been that one with Wallace. So maybe you remember this. He was asked a question during Q&A. Who knows? You're such a troublemaker. Maybe you're the one that asked the question. But he was asked a question. What would it take for you to believe that we have the original readings, say, of the Gospel of Mark? And his response was that we would need to have 10 notarized copies dated within 6 months of the original for him to be able to say that. Now, no serious historian could ever make that kind of a statement because they know the nature of the transmission of ancient texts. He knows that for any other work of antiquity, if you've got a copy within 500 years of when it was originally written, you're doing real well. So that level of hyper skepticism has to find its origination in something else. So I'm gonna tell you my theory. My theory is based upon the fact that I have all of Bart Ehrman's books sitting on my shelf. I've read his doctoral dissertation. He's never read a word that I've ever written and would not condescend to ever do so. Okay? So one of us knows the other one a whole lot better than vice versa. And the fact of the matter is, if you look at everything he's publishing, if you look at the titles and the direction he has been going, all of his popular works are meant to provide an in-depth apologetic for his apostasy. Just look at him. He's gone after books in the New Testament that are synonymous. He's gone after the concept of memory. He's gone after the transmission. He's gone after every single place you can go to sow skepticism is what his popular level books are intended to do. And I think you would be crazy to not sit back and go, so does this guy have something in his past, like maybe he was once a Christian and now he isn't? You're not allowed to mention that. You're not allowed to talk about that. I think it's highly relevant.
No, for sure. And somebody in the chat just put in Justin Bass is the guy that we were thinking
Justin
about.
Bass, yes.
It's funny because I think he's actually doing missions in the Middle East right now, but I would run into him here in Dallas in Starbucks and stuff when we chat from time to time. He's a sharp guy. and he's a good guy. But yeah, that was the debate there. But yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think that Bart Ehrman is kind of a he's kind of a parable of what happens when you go down just a little bit of skepticism, where it can lead, the slippery slope. And the things that he never dreamed of are now, the implications now of his skepticism and its effect on his total worldview. I know he doesn't want to have that kind of a conversation. He wouldn't talk about worldviews, He doesn't want to get philosophical. He doesn't even want to get theological, unless it's to...
unless it's his theology.